welcome to the I'm a Busy Guy show. My name is Vince LoCascio, and I'm a busy guy. I have another busy guy here, Sean Parnell. He's author of Historic Bars of Chicago, and he's also written for Esquire Magazine, Time Out Chicago, and About.com. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. So how do we get started? Why did you write this book?
Well, I really want to cover bars in a way that haven't really been covered before in Chicago, really focusing on the 100 most historic bars that are still in business today. To capture some of the great neighborhood bars, but also some of the oldest nightclubs, lounges, dive bars all over the city.
And you did cover extensively, I must say.
Indeed.
Also to mention, because there are so many bars, you also have a website called ChicagoBarProject.com.
That's right, yes.
What can you tell me about that?
Well, on the site, we really review bars more extensively than in the book. So we go in depth into not just the history of these places, but the food and drink and funny stories about places, as well as what you'll find there on certain days of the week. So that's more of your traditional bar review, but as written as a local would, versus professional writers that write some of the bar reviews found elsewhere.
From the heart, from the bar stool, so to speak.
Yes, indeed.
How did you determine which bars made the cut? I'm sure all these bars have history, but how do you slice it down to 100 bars?
Well, first we looked at what are the oldest bars in town, and so I went through a lot of research to do that. I've got a lot of old guidebooks that I've collected through the years, a lot of personal experience, and also combed through the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times archives, find out what were the oldest, and we wanted to get a good cross-section of different neighborhoods of the city, different types of bars, but also we wanted to find the bars that had the most interesting stories about them. Of a historic nature, culturally significant, just interesting in general. Because the bars in the book have the best story, of the oldest bars. Unfortunately, there were some bars that are quite old, but not enough is known about their history, or the stories behind these places may have been lost over time, or what have you. So we really focused on the most interesting places we could find, as well as the oldest.
It's interesting because it does, as we spoke about earlier, it tells you, these bars tell you a lot about the history of Chicago itself.
Right.
And you have a love for the city as well, besides the bars and the history of it?
Of course, yeah. My parents are both from the city. Dad grew up in Logan Square and Mom in Humboldt Park. I grew up out in the suburbs, but moved to the city after I graduated from college. And as soon as I moved here, really kind of became a big fan of all different types of bars and whatnot. We do after work, we go maybe play volleyball, softball, go to the bar afterwards. On weekends, go see music, etc. So really developed a love for Chicago bars, and I was involved with a group called the Thursday Night Club that would go to a different place every Thursday night. It was a great way to meet people after I'd moved to the city. So we would go to all over town. So I got to appreciate different neighborhoods, different types of bars, etc. And that's one thing that led to the writing of the book.
A little bit more about the book itself. Each chapter, it's a phenomenal book for people to read, but it's also a guide. You have a trivia question for each bar, and can you tell me something I always wonder about? What is the meaning of Pabst, PBRs as they're called, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer?
Well, in the Columbian Exposition, or the World's Fair of 1893, Colonel Pabst, who created the beer, would hand tie blue ribbons, to the bottles. He was there along with Herman J. Berghoff, who's the original founder of what's now called 17 West at the Berghoff, which was previously known as the Berghoff Restaurant. So they were both there as rivals selling their beer in the Columbian Exposition.
Oh, now I know.
And if another place in the book is called L&L Tavern, a classic dive bar, and they sell the most PBR in the city. So they've got a good deal. I think it's $1 per can.
Is that right?
If you're in the mood.
You mentioned the suburbs briefly, but I know in reading that the oldest liquor license, so to speak, or in the Chicagoland area is in Long Grove.
Yeah, the oldest bar in the Chicagoland area, and one of the 20 oldest in the entire country, is the Village Tavern in Long Grove. It actually started its life as a wagon shop, but over time added the ability to serve alcoholic beverages along with food, and still does so today. And one interesting thing about that place is, in addition to being the only bar in town, They pulled
The only bar in town?
Yep, literally the only license. It's not a big town, but they have the bar from one of the bars from McCormick Place before it burned down. I think it was in the '60s, early '60s. So they have that bar there at
Really?
Village Tavern.
You talk about well, one of the great things in your bar, in the Chicago Bar Project thing, you talk about honorable mentions and gone but not forgotten bars, because there are so many that are not still standing. So that's a great thing. There's, I mean, I know you could fill an encyclopedia if you wrote about everything in your books.
Yeah, we when we write about a bar on the Chicago Bar Project and it goes out of business, we migrate it to the in memoriam section, so that we don't lose, the history and what it was. And actually, a lot of people email me about places that I've previously written about, maybe that are closed, with stories, interesting trivia about them, and at times we've been inspired to write about places that are long gone. We write a review in memoriam about a place like Ricardo's, one of Rick Hogan's favorites. We've got a write-up on the Chicago Bar Project based on feedback from him and others that I've found in these various guidebooks that I've found over the years. And we've always invited people to contact us at shybarproject.com to share their bar histories, stories, photos, and at times we might get enough about an old bar that's no longer around, and we'll write a memoriam page about it. And we like to do that because the website, in addition to the book, is really meant to be a place where not only will it guide you to where you should go on Saturday night, or when you feel like going out, but also kind of contains, it's a living history of Chicago, certainly is seen through bars and nightlife, but it's really, it contains a lot of, what we're all about here in Chicago as far as our culture.
Oh, definitely.
And history.
It tells all about, it goes from everything from Wolf's Point, which was, I guess, was the first bar, to
the Wolf Tavern,
Schaller's Pump, which, and if you want to know more about this, obviously it's all in the book. But just before we go to a commercial, let me ask, you traveled the world. Now, did you say, I'm going to travel the world to check out bars around the world, or were you on vacation and were writing along the way?
Well, I wish someone would pay me to go and travel the world and check out bars, but really it's a combination of vacation and business travel. But whenever I would go to a place, I always check out, the local watering hole, of course, and just found some great places in Finland, Ireland, Asia, Australia, and, have... it's actually led me to really believe that Chicago is one of the best bar towns in the entire world. There's some great ones out there: New York City, Dublin, London.
Well, I'd have to agree, because we have every ethnicity in Chicago and the strength of it. We're going to break for a commercial, something that's new for me to do, and I'd like to tell you a little bit briefly about the commercial that you see. It's the NIAF. It's the National Italian American Foundation. And so we'll go to commercial. When we come back, we'll come back with Sean here.
Every single day, my mother was in the kitchen. My father cooked, too. He made a really good sauce. My mother made the best. The meatballs were like unbelievable. Forget about it. And all the greens, like the broccoli rabe and the dandelions, and we used to. And she'd cook the zucchinis, and she'd make beautiful salad out of dandelions and fresh tomatoes. I'm proud to be an Italian American.
The Italian American heritage. Live it, love it, celebrate it.
We're fighters, Italians are fighters, and we have passion, and we take great pride in our work. I truly believe that if I weren't Italian and I didn't have my parents, who are the ultimate Italians, as role models, I really don't believe I would ever have reached my goal. I'm an Italian American, and I am so proud of it.
The Italian American heritage. Live it, love it, celebrate it.
Welcome back. My guest is Sean Parnell. He's written this book called Historic Bars of Chicago. When we left off, we were talking about how you traveled around the world, and in the meantime, we were able to research bars. I know that John Steinbeck, I believe when he traveled around, he went to churches to meet people. But I think, like we've said before, and we'll probably even say it again, is how the bars tell the history of the city. When you first go to a bar, your first friend is the bartender, right? I mean, even if it's a strange bar. What can you tell me about quite a few of the bars that are in the book about called haunted bars?
Yep. Well,
is there any that come to mind?
Yeah, and of course, a good bartender usually has a haunted story or some kind of story like that about the place. If you take the time to ask them about it,
or she.
Guthrie's Tavern is one of the bars that I wrote about in the book, and that's haunted by one of the former owners that died on the premises, which is a good source of ghosts in pubs are former owners. One not in the book is the Scottish pub in Edgewater, and the original owner actually drank himself to death in one of the booths, and Old St. Andrews is the name. And the owner, the bartenders swear up and down that there'll be broken bottles and doors opening and footsteps across the floor when all the patrons are gone. Yeah. So there's a lot of good stories like that in the book and on the website as well.
Interesting. Now, how did you? I mean, it's interesting because I know there's some bars in the book that I wouldn't even. I don't know how I would know that they would exist, but that you covered everything from the far south side to the far north side. Now, how did you, by word of mouth, how did you find out about these bars all over the city?
Well, really a combination of my own experience, people suggesting places, but when it tried to identify what the 100 most historic, we had to look at a couple hundred bars and find out how old are they, what stories do they have. There were some places that I had never heard of myself, even though I had written for the website for about 8 years by the time I started writing the book. So would run across places in old guidebooks that were still around in the archives, et cetera, and would go there, talk to the bartender, the owners if we could, sometimes by email, a lot of times in person.
Did you give them a heads up that you were coming, or were you just?
Usually not, because I like to really experience the place as the average patron would, so with no special tours per se or what have you, but then usually ask around, and sometimes I'm asked, why so many questions, and
Who
tell
is this
them.
guy? We got a guy asking questions.
Who is this guy? Yeah, so tell them, we've got the website and writing a book, and they become quite interested. Maybe tell me a little bit more about the history of the place. And like I said, we really wanted to cover, all different types of neighborhoods. So yeah, from far south, you've got like New Apartment Lounge in Park Manor, where Von Freeman still plays, and he's well into his 80s. You've got Cork and Kerry, down in Beverly, on up to Gale Street Inn, in Jefferson Park, and then of course, uptown and all down the lakefront. So because we wanted, the book is written as a guide. So you flip through and read whatever you want. There's an entry on every bar with trivia and other interesting details about the place. But if you read the book cover to cover, like you have, you would really get a sense of Chicago's history and all the different eras as experienced through these bars and pubs. So you'd get a sense for all the different time frames, before Chicago was even a town, reading about Wolf Tavern, Chicago's first tavern at Wolf Point, as you mentioned before, on up through Prohibition, the war years, through the post-war urban decay that affected a lot of Chicago and regentrification, leading up to the gastropubs of today.
Tell me, because we talk about, what is a gastropub?
Well, a gastropub is is a pub that has excellent quality of food, kind of bistro fare, gourmet type food, but served within a pub-like atmosphere, really relaxed. You can linger. You don't have to leave your table as soon as you're done eating, because they don't turn over the tables every hour and a half like at a lot of restaurants do. And they also have as much passion for food as they do for drink. So these places often have a focus on craft beers from around the world. Some have a Belgian focus, some have a microbrew focus, some have beers from all over the world. They also often have small batch whiskey and hard to find spirits. So you just have this great combination of food and drink and atmosphere. And it's a little bit new for the book, but Owen and Engine, is one of those gastropubs that's perhaps the most well-known in Chicago. because it was listed in the new
And
Michelin guide.
that would be
came
on
out.
your site. It's not a historic.
Yeah, there's a review on Chicago Bar Project, but not in the book, because there we focus on the most historic, and the gastropub is a new trend, so not really covered so much in the book, but the website covers that.
In moving along with the historic things, I guess they were called Schlitz Tide bars. There's two that come to mind from the book, Schuba's in Southport, and clearly noted on the building, especially if you love architecture, you notice, is the Schlitz logo, not just painted but sculpted.
Yes.
What could you tell me about those and about what a Tide bar is?
Well, the Tide houses were owned by the brewery, so Prohibition actually outlawed this practice. But prior to Prohibition, you would have the brewery actually build and own the bars, and they would lease the operation of the bar to, the quote-unquote owner, really the operator. And these guys, because they were running a business, with alcohol, sometimes didn't pay their bills, and, they had a hard time running the place. So as soon as one guy kind of went out of business, they get the next guy in there. And the city really loved the practice because, the big breweries like Schlitz at the time, which was the biggest, they would pay their taxes and pay their bills on time. So the city actually, liked this practice because the individual bar owners, weren't as good. So Schlitz built a number of bars. Also, so Schuba's and Southport Lanes, written in the book, are both Schlitz Tide houses. There's also, not in the book, but Skylark is an old Tide house, Max on Division, and as well as there's one in Ukrainian Village, I forget the name, by the Peter Han Brewery. So that's a practice that Prohibition outlawed because after Prohibition, they said, the breweries cannot sell beer directly to the public. So it has to be sold through distributors and bars. So there's no more Tide houses. And a lot of them have been converted into businesses other than bars these days. So it's kind of a dying breed.
Well, it's a great thing that somebody saved that architecture because it is beautiful. Without offending anybody, but, because there's 100 bars obviously in this book. But I'll ask you, briefly about a few of these. First off, Schaller's Pump on the south side.
Yeah, the longest continuously operating tavern in Chicago, dates back to 1888, and is run by generations of the Schallers. It's a great family down on the south side. So this is a great place before and after Sox games. They also serve, a really good, home cooking type lunch and dinner as well. The butt steak is their specialty, and it tastes a lot better than it sounds. But that's a classic Chicago tavern where the Democratic headquarters for the area is right across the street. So you have 5 different mayors who had come from Bridgeport, where Schaller's Pump is located. You'll have all kinds of political discussions there with the dailies.
If the walls could talk, right?
If the walls could talk, indeed. And as a former speakeasy as well.
What about Berghoff's? They have the #1 liquor license.
Yeah, Herman J. ran to City Hall to get liquor license #1 when Prohibition was repealed. And so he's got the first one, and still on display, actually, at 17 West of the Berghoff, which is called as such. Used to be the Berghoff Restaurant, but closed a few years ago and reopened shortly thereather. So there's still some people that don't realize it's reopened because of the slightly new name. But it's now run by Carolyn Berghoff, which is the 3rd generation of Berghoff to run Berghoff's.
What about Sheffield's? I mean, what a notoriety that you say it's your favorite.
Yeah, Sheffield's is my favorite bar in the book because it's the most well-rounded. It's got great history. Billing dates back, 100 years or so. It's also one of the first, not the first, but one of the first bars to really serve a lot of craft beers and microbrews. It's also, the first warm day of the year when it rolls around sometime June or July. Is just one of the best beer gardens in town. They've got a great menu of barbecue. They've got literary events there, great selection of beer. So it's one of the best, most well-rounded.
No, I'm joking. We're going to go to commercial, and we'll be right back with Sean Parnell.
We were forced to get along. We were all poor, living on welfare, and it wasn't about culturally where we were from. It was more about pride in being a stand-up person, having honesty. I am proud of my Italian heritage.
The Italian American heritage. Live it, love it, celebrate it.
We lived in a very small home surrounded by my aunts and uncles and my paternal grandparents, and it was a terrific experience. My grandparents had gardens all over the house, fig plants, they had grape arbors that you would walk under, a picnic table outside. It was just a wonderful way to grow up. I'm an Italian American, and I am proud of it.
The Italian American heritage. Live it, love it, celebrate it.
Welcome back. We're talking to Sean Parnell, author of Historic Bars of Chicago. We left off, we were talking about some notable mentions. Like I said, there's 100 bars in there, but we got to talk about some. So I wanted to ask you about Sluggers, but before we do, I wanted to throw my little tidbit in there about it. Steve Strauss, his father owned the first neighborhood bar, or not the first neighborhood bar, but in the neighborhood that I grew up in. So I wanted to give Steve a shout out on that one. But what can you tell me about Sluggers?
Well, Sluggers is one of the classic sports bars around Wrigley Field, about a stone's throw. I remember as a kid, we'd go up to the batting cages, after Cubs games to wait for traffic to abate. So it's been around for quite a while. Now they've got dueling pianos upstairs as well. So just a classic, sports bar in Chicago. So one of the first places to have a lot of TVs and, to be really lively after Cubs games and whatnot. So.
The Einstein that I am, I figured out it said that Ernie Banks' number is behind the pianos because he used to say play two, so 2 pianos. Wow.
Right.
Rocket science. Anyways, the name of that bar was Symphony Liquors. His father was Nate. Something, not to go back to that store, but what I remember is seemed like the huge percentage of the bars back in the day had the neighborhood bar and attached was the liquor store. You don't see that too often now. What changed all that? Or
yeah, it's really a dying breed of bar because they're, shall we say, the most cost-effective of the bars out there. As a lot of property values have risen and property taxes and rents have gone up, a lot of these places have really been driven out of business, or the ownership retires or passes on, and there's really no one to take on the bar. So, and I think the city doesn't outlaw it, per se, but I think kind of frowns upon the packaged goods type premises or on-premise license. So they're still out there. You don't really see any new ones opening up. So the ones that are still in business, not sure how long those are going to be around. And some of those are classic dive bars.
Are these people offended when you call them dive bars?
Mostly no. I think a great dive bar is something to really cherish, because they have the cheapest beer around usually, so you can have a pretty good time for, sometimes less than $10. Usually have a good jukebox. You might not want to look too closely at the, the floor or, the crevices, yeah. But
I think you're missing out if you go into a bar looking at the floors and the crevices.
Yeah, you're there for the people, to hang out, have fun, talk to people, have a few beers, listen to some great jukebox music, et cetera. So I think, for a classic dive, the owners take a certain amount of pride in that.
What about probably one of the most famous bars in the city, Billy Goat Tavern?
Well, Billy Goat, so many stories about it. Billy Goat Cyanus, who, it's named after original owner, placed the curse on the Cubs in 1945. Still working, especially this year. But one interesting thing about him is he was really into publicity stunts. So the first place that he ran was called Miller's, and it was right across from the United Center, the Chicago Stadium, which is now United Center, and that's actually where the curse was placed on the Cubs. It wasn't outside of Wrigley, but it was later, kind of made in jest. I cursed the Cubs, and that one of the reporters was there who would, they'd cover events at the Chicago Stadium and then come by for a drink. So he's a big fan of the press and did a lot of publicity stunts. But yeah, the actual curse was made at the bar, not outside of Wrigley Field.
What about because like I said, I'm sure you could write a whole encyclopedia, but there's neighborhood bars, there's taverns, as we call them, pubs, but there's some restaurant bars, to name a few. Gibson's, Italian Village, the old Nick's Fish Market. The Pump Room is in the book. in hotel bars. I mean, do you see that happening down the road? Maybe writing or adding them to your the Chicago Bar Project?
Well, we do cover hotel bars in the Chicago Bar Project, as we don't really, hang out at those hotels because we're residents of the city. Don't really frequent them a whole lot, though with a couple of exceptions, like Sable is a great one in a new boutique hotel that's opened up, has one of the largest menus of single malt scotch in the city, over 100, a lot of interesting spirits. So there's also some interesting rooftop beer gardens that have opened up at some of the downtown hotels, like at the Dana Hotel, the W Hotel. So these are a great place to go. We review them on the site. Not really of a historic nature, so of course not in the book, although we do cover the Pump Room and Cote d'Or, which are some classic, hotel bars. Cote d'Or actually has the second,
That's in the
oldest
Drake
license
Hotel?
in the Drake Hotel, indeed. So,
And then back, there's some theme bars. I don't know if you want to call them that, but I think somebody that needs mentioning was Kenny Smith that did bars like Exit, Crowbar, and we talked a bit about Albanians. What can you tell me about Albanians?
well, Albanians, we write about in memoriam on the website as an old punk rock club that only operated for, as long as the punk rock scene was around, for about 4 years, late 70s. And the first punk rock bar was La Mer Viper, and they opened up after that place burned down. And that place was really the center of the punk rock scene in the late 70s, and it was named after Dion O'Banion, who's one of Bugs Moran's henchmen, who was shot in his flower shop that he ran by day. And of course, he was a bootlegger by night, so he was gunned down in his flower shop nearby, not where O'Banion's
So his
was
wake
located.
took place instantaneously with flowers and everything, right?
Indeed.
You give great mention to Division Street, the bars, and quite a few of them are in there, Butch McGuire's, the Lodge. But I'm just wondering, I hope, like I said down the road that you write, there's so much to write about, but the whole Rush Street thing, because there was Rush Street and the Division Street was at the end, although it was like you did the whole thing.
Right.
But, what we're going to do a second show. We got so much to talk about. I got to take this phone call if you forgive me a second. Hello. I'm going to finish this one. Yeah. All right, I'll book you next week or something. Yeah, okay, bye. This guy's trying to get on my show. I can't get him out. Sorry for that interruption. But I tell you, and I said it over and over again, this book is phenomenal. I do got to ask you, how do you manage to look this healthy after visiting all these bars? I don't know.
Well, I do what I can,
Yeah. Well, I salute you. The book is great. It not only tells about the bars, it tells about things to do. It's giving you places to go, music, food, the history of Chicago. So, thanks. I got to go. Sorry, I have to leave.
Oh, you're a busy guy.
And here's some cannolis for you.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
All right. Enjoy those. Thanks for being on the show.